Okay, hey everybody.
Morning.
I'm so excited to continue this talk about instruments. It's such an overwhelming subject. I mean, even with all the gaps and things that are not known, there's just so much there. It's very overwhelming. So I'll do my best. I wanted to just present this book, which I think I didn't present last time, and most of it is taken from this book, which is called Music in Ancient Israel Palestine, and it's from an archaeomusicologist named Joachim Braun. And Joachim Braun was, he worked at Bar Ilan. I think he's originally from Latvia. And he has written many books on Western classical music and modern Western instruments, as well as being, the go-to guy for all of these discussions on ancient instruments. It's interesting, I'll just say that Robert Alter has not read Joachim Braun. And it's kind of funny to come across it, because he clearly didn't consult Joachim Braun. And I mean, it's just interesting to see what people's interest in music is. But anyway, that's it. So let's get going. Let me share my screen here. If I can figure out how to do that, share screen, share, and then I'm gonna put this. Okay, can everybody see this? No? Okay,
Yeah.
hold on. Yes?
It says an ancient straw pipe.
Okay, so I'm gonna go back a little farther. Okay, so first I wanna play this. I wanna start where Nicolo left off yesterday with his wonderful talk on the medieval string instruments. And I want to point out a couple of things. The lyre actually does seem to start out as a solo instrument. Now the lyre in Hebrew kinor, and that root that we get handed down to us, kaf nun resh, or in English KNR as it's often transliterated, is already ancient by the time that it shows up in the Bible. It has, the root goes back to, they don't know where the root came from. It's just sort of one of these words that's always been in existence, and it's transnational. So you find the root, you find cognates, words that sound like that in both Semitic and non-Semitic languages, in Egyptian, in Sumerian, which I think is also not a Semitic language. And it's just one of those instruments that's always been there. Likewise, the toph, the drum, which we spoke about a little bit last time, which is probably an onomatopoeic word, just having to do with that doof sound when you hit the skin of the drum. And likewise, that root, Zion Mem Resh, ZMR to us, which gets transliterated into Zemer or Zamru or Zimra. All those words are also ancient words. Probably by the time it shows up in the Bible, it's already ancient. These are words that have just sort of always been there. And I want to point out, so the lyre seems to start out played as a solo instrument. As Nicola was pointing out, it was probably played with a plectrum. Then somewhere I have a picture of a plectrum. But it's probably played with the plectrum, which he identifies as being more of a melody instrument, and also the nevel, which is probably a larger lyre. And Braun says that this is probably played with the fingers. That makes it a more rhythmic instrument than the kinora might have been. He also points out something very important: song versus dance, rhythm versus words. And with that said, I want to play this initial text sung by modern Yemenite Jews in Israel. The Yemenite Jews are thought to be the very closest thing that we have to what may have been sung in ancient times. They were a secluded population within a secluded country. So it's thought that their tradition is as close as we're going to get to what may have been. And I'm going to play this. I'd like you to listen, please, to, okay, so it starts out with an accordion. He's going to play a melody. I want you to note the small range of that melody. I want you to notice how when the singer starts singing that the song now becomes ornamented. I want you to notice how short the phrases are, and I want you to pay attention to the fact that this actually sounds like a tango. Okay. And before I go on, can you all hear that well? Or do I need to share the audio better? Yes, good, okay. Okay, so this is Dror Yikra, written around the 9th century, this poem. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to stop it there. They sing many, many verses. Notice how short the phrases are. Notice how essential the rhythm is to keep that. Can you hear me? Can you hear me better now? No?
You're fine.
I'm fine? Okay. So notice how short those phrases are and the call and answer form of those phrases. And this may, to some extent, reflect the music that was there. It's got a very short, it's got a very small range. So it goes from ya ya da dee dee da da ya 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 ya. It's pretty much the whole melody. Ya ya is the range of that melody, and this perhaps identifies what ancient music may have been, and why you need these rhythmic ornaments to keep the melody going, and why you need that intense rhythm that keeps the melody going and keeps you engaged in the text. And as we looked at this picture last time, here you have a lyre and a drum, and of course we don't know what's happening, whether somebody is singing along with this or dancing or just listening, but you can see the very essential rhythmic beginning of music, and it's alluded to in the Jacob story. We learned a little bit how the two main influences of instruments and instrument development came from Mesopotamia and from Egypt. And Braun talks a lot about how the fact that even within these influences, and sometimes you can see very distinct influences from either Egypt or Mesopotamia, that there was an indigenous development of it within Canaan and later ancient Israel. We looked at some of the trade routes. What we didn't talk about last time, which I'll just mention briefly, is the different ages. So we have the trade routes and the influences that go through Canaan, ancient Israel. And we also have development within the different ages. The Bronze Age lasts until about 1200. And the Iron Age is mostly important. And this probably represents the development of most of the instruments that we read in the Bible, is this age between 1200 and 587, right before the destruction of the temple in 586. We took a little bit of time to talk about how the different instruments are different. So we have a harp and a lyre. Harp is not a lyre, they're very different. I think Nicolo spoke about the strings being perpendicular to the frame. You can also see that the lyre rather, is a four-sided instrument as opposed to this more bowed or sometimes triangular instrument. And we can see here that the lute is a completely different instrument with this neck. And we also learned that the lyres they change over time and by geography. So here's one of the earliest lyres that was from ancient Sumer around 2500 BCE. And this is one man's representation of what that lyre may have looked like. Wait, where are you, Peter Pringle? Okay, here. Might be a little small. No. What, Saul? I can't hear you.
No
What?
sound.
What? There's no sound?
Nope.
Oh, I'm sorry. Small, I know. Okay. Sorry. There we go. Can you see that? Is that too small? Okay. So there's Peter Pringle. So you get an idea of what that instrument might have sounded like. Now, every Western player that I hear making these reproductions plays this very languid style. I mean, he eventually gets a little bit more rhythmic, but why I started out with this very rhythmic song that we began at the beginning is because being that the music I think comes from dance, I think there likely would have been a more rhythmic element to it. And let me see, why aren't I going forward? Why aren't I going to the next slide? Okay, should be. Okay, so here's another smaller, different type of lyre. And this is made by a man named Michael Levy. And it seems that he has fashioned this on the Bar Kokhba coin, which is made somewhere around 135, I believe, of the Common Era, during or after the Bar Kokhba revolution or uprising. Braun says that this probably does not represent a biblical lyre, but nonetheless, we can just get a look, and we can get a look-see at what this might have sounded like. Okay, so that's that. I'm sure it was. I'm sure the music was a little bit more virtuosic than what he's playing. Let's see. Here's Peter Pringle again. On a harp. Come on, baby. Okay. So he, by the way, gives a disclaimer on this website that he really is just making this up. So we don't know whether what he's playing is original or not, but the instruments seem to be made according to what he has learned, and whatever he's doing, he's really a great player and singer. But this is perhaps what the harp may have sounded like. Okay, very nice. There's lovely player. There are no harps in the Tanakh as far as I have read. So this is an instrument that exists in the ancient Near East. It does not seem to have made its way into Mesopotamia. Remember, you need people to make these instruments. So if nobody was trained in how to make these instruments, then it seems reasonable that you didn't have them there. Okay, so now the other instrument we saw in Psalm 150 was the toph, and it starts out here. This is from the Chalcolithic period, right after the Stone Age. They discover copper, and there's this little short Chalcolithic period. And here she is, and this is the goddess Ishtar, or Inanna, I think her name is, and she's married to Dumuzi, the god Dumuzi, for which the month Tammuz is named after. And we just, I think we're still in the month Tammuz, or was that Rosh Chodesh yesterday? Yesterday, right? So Rosh Chodesh was yesterday, so now we're in the month of Av. But up until very recently, we were in the month of Tammuz, which is named for her husband, the god Dumuzi. And she's shown here. She's represents fertility. She's graphic genitalia. And I don't know why they think this is holding a container of milk, but that's what they believe. This represents a container of milk. And she has this little hourglass drum shaped over her arm, and it's the beginning of, under her arm rather, and it's the beginning of the association of drums with women, which always have an association with women. And here's a much later figurine of women with drums. This word tof usually gets, even though it's just a generic word that means drum, it gets usually translated as a timbrel, which basically gets translated as tambourine. So, I mean, these are little frame drums, they're called, right? It's a skin stretched across a frame, a wooden frame. And here she is, always with very prominent breasts, which is another sign of fertility. This looks like it might have been made on some kind of wheel, this very uniform shape. Spoke about lutes, right? Going back to this picture. I'm a little out of order here, forgive me, but we spoke about lutes. Now somehow lutes go from, I'm going to go all the way back here. Lutes somehow travel from Mesopotamia down through Canaan and into Egypt. Into Egypt, they get a very solid grounding as the instrument of prostitutes for some reason. And these aren't ladies of the nights. These are usually cultic prostitutes, or sort of harems, I guess might even be more appropriate. These aren't ladies hanging out on street corners playing the lute. These are usually, as you can see, this looks as if there is some sort of hierarchy here with different women, a very nicely dressed woman playing the harp, this naked lady right behind her, possibly her daughter in training, another woman playing the ugav, which we'll look at. She's wearing something, but she's transparent, and not sure what to think of this lady who's playing the lyre. She might just be the band, who knows? Anyway, okay, so here is, sorry. Okay, going back all through these guys. Okay, so the other instrument in this picture is the ugav, which really sticks around into modern times and becomes what we know now as the ney flute. All right. So this has probably 6 holes, it looks like, as many folkloric instruments, folkloric pipes, penny whistle has 6 holes. There's a lot you can do with 6 holes. This was probably, most folkloric instruments are on a particular scale, which might be another reason why we hear of all these different lyres with all these different strings. They might have represented different scales, different notes for different songs. I mean, modern folkloric instruments, if you play one of these things like a harmonica, for instance, and not a chromatica harmonica, but a blues harmonica, somebody who plays this professionally walks around with a whole kit of different harmonicas so that they can change key. Likewise with penny whistle, somebody who's a penny whistle player walks around with a whole bunch of little different penny whistles in different keys so that you could play with whatever other instruments are playing in different keys. Most basic penny whistles are in D, for instance. So there's 6 holes, and if you lift up your fingers sequentially, you get a D major scale. If you want to play in the key of F, you're sort of out of luck. You kind of can't. You have to switch instruments. So these instruments, of which I admittedly don't know very much, they might come in different keys. I mean, in different keys for different songs, different singers, etc. The last thing we spoke about in Psalm 150 was the cymbals, and these were largely only ceremonial, and played by men. Okay, So getting back to some other instruments. So here are the instruments in Psalm 150. The shofar and the lyres, the kinnor and the nevel, the drums and the dance, and the string instruments, the minim and the ugav. We spoke about why these instruments, but there's other instruments in the Tanakh that don't make it into this psalm. And as a matter of fact, don't make it into any of the psalms. And one of those instruments is the chalil, which is translated as pipe. And sometimes it's translated as flute. And to what we think of as a flute, especially to people like myself and like Simon, who actually play the flute, this is not a flute. This is probably a reed instrument. And remember that these instruments were made oftentimes from bamboo. So the reed was actually cut into the top of the instrument. They were usually double reed instruments, and they could have been single reed instruments. They were also made out of bone, in which case you probably blew into them, much the way you might have blown into the ney flute. There was some sort of hole configured on top that you blew into. And here are some configurations of the chalil. So you can see it's usually a double pipe, and all the figures are with somebody playing on the bottom, right? So the pipe looks like there's two pipes of the same size. The finger position looks the same. So these might have been, this one looks a little bit longer. So one of them might have been a drone, or they might have been able to play two melodies at the same time. And now I'm going to switch for a second and see if I can find I couldn't get this website to play, but this is a good idea. The word chalil becomes an olos, and whether that's a completely different instrument or just a different name as the, okay, so let me see, share. Okay, can you see this man holding this instrument? Yes, okay, good. So
I'm Barnaby Brown. It's the 14th of May 2018, and I'm playing a Pidna aulos. The original was found in 1996 in northern Greece, in the ancient Macedonian port of Pidna. And this reproduction was made by Robin Howell. I received it last year, and it's made from Scottish deer bone. Beautifully cleaned by Sylvia Stevens, sent to Toronto to be, well, no instrument can a tone. I have to stretch it bigger. And if I want to play a semitone, I have to compress it smaller. And that allows me to modulate. It's rather a beautiful system. At least I find that as I get to know the instrument,
sorry. Okay, so maybe, this is Greek, may or may not have been similar to what was played in ancient Israel. But here's another iteration of what might have been happening. Wait a second, come on, baby, where's my PowerPoint? Okay, back to the PowerPoint. Okay. Can you see the PowerPoint again now? Yes, okay. So here's the PowerPoint again. And you can see that this hand position of this creature is played pretty much the same way he's playing it in the video. Let's see. The chalil is very limited to how many times it can come into the temple. This is from Talmud already. It's not really mentioned in Tanakh. But we do have mention of Khalil in the Tanakh, in that it's really an instrument that's used for weddings, funerals, celebrations. I mean, if you want to have a party, then you're going to get yourself a Khalil player, right? The Khalil player. Now remember that in the days when we had just the kinnor might be somewhat limited, right? The kinnor might not be able to do all these ornaments. That's what Nicola was showing us yesterday. The ornaments are somewhat limited. If there was a vocal style that was mirrored or imitated by these instruments, a flute has much greater, or sorry, not a flute, a Khalil, but a wind instrument has much more flexibility at that time. Before you have an instrument with a neck, like the lute has full flexibility on ornaments, on melody, on range. But before that, you have these wind instruments that can slide notes more easily, that can do the ornaments more easily. They're more likely to mimic a voice. And remember, these ranges are small. So even if you have a wind instrument like a Khalil or an Olos, whichever one they're going to call it, it's likely able to play a song more easily than a lyre is. And it's also going to be louder than lyre is. So they limit the Khalil. The Khalil is not competing with the priests for text. And I do think that there may be set up a sort of a competition between text and dance, or text and instruments, which is why in the Psalms you pretty much only have the lyres as instruments in the Psalms, right? You don't have Khalil. You only have the drum mentioned. The tof is mentioned, I think, 4 times in the Psalms. It's almost, of the 15 Psalms that have instruments mentioned into them, 11 of them are only the lyres, because the lyres are truly better accompaniment instruments than either a drum, which is going to probably precipitate dance, or the Khalil, which is possibly going to compete with the singer. Here she is. And here's the other problem. Here she is. Oh my God. This is possibly a depiction of a cult prostitute. This is more of a Egyptian depiction of the double flute. I can make this bigger. You know, Shara, I can send you these if you want them. Okay, so this is also an Egyptian influence of the double flute. So this is more of a Mesopotamian influence of the double flute, and you can just see the difference in style. This is a female, and you have many female Khalil players. I mean, the Khalil was played by both men and women, but it seems that once you take, I'm going to go back to this slide, once you take the fertility out of sex, then women get turned into prostitutes, right? So you don't really have women, you don't seem to really have neutral women playing these instruments. They seem to be either cult prostitutes, or at least as they're depicted in the iconography, right? They seem to be either cult prostitutes or fertility goddesses. Khalil does not show up in the Levitical orchestra. And here are fragments of what an olos is. They define this one as the tip of a professional instrument. It's encased in, they say it's encased in copper. They see it's the end of the instrument. I'm not sure why this hole is here. This looks like it would be more the top of the instrument. But this is more of a professional flute. You can see that the holes are evenly spaced. They're nicely rounded. This might be more of a folk instrument, and people made these instruments. This was found in households. You know, it's really easy to make one of these instruments. You take something, you take a hollow something, you know, either a bamboo or probably bamboo, and you can make one of these instruments. They're found very frequently, and they're used. And I have this great video of this man who's a great player, and just watch what he does. This is a plastic straw. Peter Bastian. Isn't that amazing? You know, but it just gives you the idea, you know, that people with skill could take the materials around them and play with a very high degree of technical ability. Okay, so let's see, moving on. I'm going to move quickly now because I want to get to something really important. So the other thing that does not make it into Tanakh, except for once, are percussion instruments. And Braun calls these instruments idiophones. And idio in this sense does not mean simple. It's not related to the word idiot, it's related to the word idiom. So these are instruments that make their own sound, as opposed to having a resonator, which the lyres do. And like if you think about a guitar or a violin, you know, you pluck the string and then you have this big, and then you have the sound hole, and you have this big hollow instrument where that string vibrates and the sound, the air resonates throughout it. Idiophones are like, you know, I don't need a resonator. If I clap my hands, and some of these instruments are obviously called clappers, I make my own sound. So that's the word. So idio is related to idiomatic, right? Self. And you have all these ancient instruments that we're going to look at in a minute. These different clappers, which have their modern correlates in bones and in claves. You have shakers. I love this one, right? These are the Judean ones. They don't usually have a figure on them. These are also Judean ones. This is a hand grip, so you can hold it and shake it like that. This is an Edomite. This looks like it was the top. There's a stick that goes here, and you hold the stick and you shake it. Now, despite the fact that these are found absolutely everywhere, Braun says, right? So that when they excavate ancient Israel, all throughout ancient Canaan and Israel, these are found everywhere. Everybody had one. And it points to the ongoing cultic celebrations that were happening throughout the whole time. I mean, I think up through Roman times, you found these percussion instruments. And this is what it might have looked like. You know, we have, and he calls this is an orgiastic festival. This depicts a Babylonian style. Here's a woman, she's female. This is a lyre. This is another lyre. She looks like she's playing it with some kind of stick or plectrum. This is probably a man seated on either dancing or playing a drum. And here are, you know, exaggerated sexual images with these, you know, very large phalluses. And here's another guy, and he's shaking something over here that pretty much looks like one of these guys. And we had a discussion about the instruments at the Penn Museum. So after we had that discussion, I went and I found these. This is an ancient maraca from the Penn Museum. So what's the problem with this? Where's my David story? I hope I didn't take it out. So there's a story in, So there's a story thank you, as David is bringing the ark back to Jerusalem, and he breaks out into this ecstatic dance. And in the story, Michal looks down and she's horrified because he's wearing a little bit covering, but it's not doing a very good job, and everybody can see him, he's exposed, and he's dancing with all of these instruments. He's dancing with atzei haroshim, which is these wood instruments, these clappers that we just saw, and these shakers, uvemina'anim, which is also the wood instruments, and with tziltzalim, are also probably cymbals, but they could be the sistrums. Sorry, I'm running out of time, so I'm going fast. So look at this. So this is this, and Michal looks down and she's horrified. David the king is dancing before God with all of these instruments. But then what happens when this story is retold in Chronicles, that all of these instruments get wiped out. So now David and Israel is not playing with all of their might, or with all of the instruments with cypress wood. Now they're playing with songs and with nevilim and with drums and with cymbals and with trumpets. Now they're playing from the Levitical orchestra, right? So these early cultic instruments, which by the way, women played, these cultic instruments and the goddesses that play them are gone. But not to say, but this is really what they might have looked like. And this comes from, I think let me see, I hope I put a note in here. I didn't put a note in here. So these are thought to be representative of perhaps the orchestra that plays for Saul as he's wandering along, and he meets a band of prophets who are speaking in ecstasy, and the band of prophets are preceded by a band. And it's thought that this might be representative of the band, and you can see the Khalil player or the Olas player, the cymbal player. This is a lyre, and you can see that it's on his shoulder, right? This is a little walking lyre. This is a marching band if ever there was one. And here's the little stand. Now, it was thought that this was representing the band preceding the prophets that met Saul, but perhaps it was more of a cultic stand. And I think we're out of time, so I raced through this, but isn't it so interesting, right? Yeah. Okay, so I think we have 2 minutes, and I'm not sure what Babette's schedule is. I mean, I have time to talk depending on what Babette's schedule is and what everybody else would like to do if there's any questions.
I can hang out for a couple of minutes for some quick questions, but I do have something right on top of this for
Okay,
CS.
you just let us know and we'll be gone. Thank you, Babette.
Okay. Yep.
Okay, good. Okay, so I'm not seeing the chat.
So you need to stop screen sharing so that you can see chat and you can see all of that much easier. There you go.
All right, and chat. Okay, awesome, guys. Okay, good.
So everybody do the same. Raise your hand so she can see it with your little blue hand. Everybody is asking if you can share the PowerPoint.
I think that this is, I mean, sure. I mean, I think that this is going to be posted. So.
Michael Goldstein has his hand raised.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
I really appreciate your history in showing in sculpture and coin how these instruments may have looked. And is that, yesterday when we saw all of his instruments, they're built based on that information, is that correct?
No, so the instruments that Nicola was playing are, 1,000, 1,500 years later. So he's playing medieval instruments.
Did they find them somewhere or did they construct them from instructions?
You'd have to ask him about those. But they are much later than the biblical instruments, and they're also not Mid-Eastern for the most part.
But the ones you showed, the biblical instruments, were all constructed from artwork of the time? Is that thousands of years ago, people dug things up and you found images and then built something?
Correct.
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, thank you, Lori. I'm glad I'm clear. I always try. Anybody else? Yeah, I mean, the instruments that are reconstructed, I mean, nobody's playing an actual medieval instrument. You know, I mean, the wood degrades. So there's no, which is why we don't really have any, we don't have too many of these lyres, you know, these instruments that were made of bamboo or wood, you know, we don't really have those. We have the iconography, you know, so we have the pictures that were, that people reference them, but you know, like how many strings were there, what were the tuning of the strings? There's only scant information, and of course, since the Bible is, you know, before the Bible is even comes into being, it's ancient, you know. So the history of these instruments, we don't know. You know, at some point they come into being. Yeah.
Thank you. Lisa, this is Judy. Do you have, I mean, this is, do you know anything more about the history of music as it goes in the Jewish prayer service, as it goes forward after the exile and we become real Jews? Do you have any information? Like when did musical instruments be outlawed in the prayers, like in
Much later. Well, the instruments are, it's an interesting question, you know, whether the instruments are, I mean, they're not really outlawed until the Talmud. You know, we don't really read anything about the Bible about them being outlawed. They're just sort of put in one place or another. And also, I mean, remember the Bible is redacted, you know, so whatever, whoever compiled the biblical text, you know, the Psalms, you know, what process that went through, I mean, who knows? But early Judaism, but late Judaism and early Christianity both try to prohibit these instruments. The Christianity failed and Judaism sort of succeeded. And one of the things, of course, why you can't have instruments in the temple or in the synagogue is because you might break a string. You can't work on Shabbat, you know, so if you break a string, you can't fix the string, right? You can't have to fix an instrument on Shabbat in the synagogue. So it's not specifically so much a prohibition against playing the instrument. It's that you can't fix the instrument, you know. So then the argument is, well, what about if, you know, your flute's not going to break? Why can't I play a flute? So, but you know, the fence around the Torah. And I did my own little research once, and I asked a bunch of rabbis why you couldn't play on Shabbat, and I think I also asked Rabbi Kleinbaum, and everybody gave me a different answer. You know, some people said because you couldn't carry, and some people said because you couldn't fix the instruments, and some people said because of the noise and the sound. You know, so you know, it's not really that well codified. But I think the chief issue is having to fix a string, which is an issue if you've ever, you know, worked with guitar players. They break strings all the time. You know, I don't know how often that happens to wire players. I'm not sure that drums are okay. Depends on where. I don't think they are okay in an Orthodox service, but yeah, but probably for a different reason than the lyre wouldn't be okay, right? So drums, if drums are prohibited, it might be for, it might. Can you mute yourself, please, Shep? You're making me.
Yeah, hi, Lisa. Are there any professional performers who perform this ancient type of music on reconstructed instruments, or?
Nobody knows what the music sounded like, and especially like the lyre. And I think I said something incorrect last time. Ron says that, Shep, can you mute yourself or stay still? Or both. Yeah.
It'd be kind of cool to hear it, you know?
Okay. The lyre gives way to the lute, and you could hear this in Arabic music. The lute is so much more flexible than the lyre in terms of its ability to play melody, in terms of its ability, in terms of its range, in terms of its ability to do ornaments. Shep, please just take yourself off video. I mean, I can't look at this. The lyre is, the lute is so much more flexible in terms of its ability to play melody. and remember that the lute is not a guitar. I mean, if you've heard Sam, and by the way, let me put my plug in now for Sam to give us a lesson, Sam Rosen to give us a lesson on Sephardic music, on Mizrahi music, and where the melody is and where the rhythm is and where the ornaments are. You know, because the lute is really a melody instrument, much more so than a lyre has the capability of being. So by the 4th century, I think by the 4th century of the Common Era, Braun says the lyre has been replaced by the lute. So very, very early on. So it's in early Greek music and late Jewish music, but it gets replaced very early on. And as you can see in these depictions that I showed, I don't think anybody really knows how to play the lyre, because I think it's much more rhythmic than the way they're playing it, but I don't know.
Lisa, thank you so much. At the outset of your presentation, you mentioned that Alter clearly has not read Braun. Is that simply because there's no reference to Braun, or do you think that he might actually be able to fill in so many of his unknowns? You know,
I can't. I remember thinking that, and I can't remember why I say that. But I think he translates the Neville as a lute, for one thing. I mean, I think he does that type of thing, and the Neville is it's just not a lute. You know, so it's interesting. So the Neville is a name without an instrument, and the lute is an instrument without a name. You know, so we don't really have what we call a lute. There's one place in the Bible where it's called shalashim, which means 3, but there's apparently a 3-string lute, and I have somewhere another video of Peter Pringle playing a 3-string lute, what looks to be a 3-string lute. But it doesn't, aside from that there's one place in the Bible where it seems to be there, but it's not in the Bible. Sherry.
I missed what you just said about the Neville and what you thought it might be. Could you
So the
expound on
Neville
that?
is confusing to the translators, and I think Braun says that, you know, by the time many of these terms are ancient, by the time they show up in the Bible, and by the time the Septuagint is written and the Vulgate is written, a lot of these terms are already ancient, and a lot of these terms are already lost, which is why there's so much trouble in translating them. So the Neville is apparently, you know, we just have the root, we don't have the vowel. So he says there's also a word naval, which might be the Neville. So it's confusing, but there's different words that word might refer to. So leather sack is one other translation, and sometimes you see Neville translated as bagpipe. So the Neville, but he feels strongly that based on whatever threads he's managed to follow, and I don't remember them offhand, that it refers to a lyre, and that it's just a larger lyre that's played with fingers as opposed to a plectrum, and has possibly different lower strings than a kinnor. So it's sort of like violin and bass, maybe, right? Violin and cello, that it's plucked, it's rhythmic. It might give it more of a rhythmic grounding to the melody.
I'm really sorry, but I only have like
Babette,
5 or so minutes.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Great talk.
Thank you, Lisa.